Somewhere in history, these animals were still alive, moving, breathing, existing in a world that no longer has them. And all we have left of them are a few final photographs, images that weren't taken to be famous but turned out to be just because it captured the moment before an entire species disappeared forever. I'm going to show you 10 of the last known photos of animals that no longer exist today. Some you've probably never heard about before, others are controversial, and some become a lot more powerful once you understand the story behind them. Let's begin with number 1. The Sicilian wolf is an extinct subspecies of grey wolf that once lived only on the island of Sicily. It was smaller and more lightly built than the Italian wolf, and for thousands of years it was part of Sicily's natural ecosystems. It likely arrived during the late Pleistocene, when lower sea levels formed land connections between Sicily and mainland Europe. It survived alongside other large carnivores, but over time it became the only one of these species to persist. It adapted to different environments across the island, with populations varying in size depending on region and prey availability. Its decline likely began in the late medieval period, when many prey species disappeared from Sicily, and as food sources dwindled, wolves were increasingly pushed into conflict with humans. And by the 19th century, they were heavily persecuted through bounty systems, where they were actively hunted for rewards. Still, the species persisted longer than expected. Late 1800s reports described it as fairly common in parts of Sicily, but pressure continued to rise. Habitat loss, prey collapse, and hunting gradually reduced numbers, and by the early 20th century, it had nearly vanished. The last confirmed killing is believed to have been occurred around 1924. Though unverified reports suggest a few may have survived into the 1930s, with possible sightings even into the 1960s and 70s. Long after its disappearance, scientists re-examined the museum specimens and in 2018 confirmed it as a distinct subspecies through morphology and DNA. But by then, the Sicilian wolf was already long gone, leaving only preserved remains and this one photo. The northern Sumatran rhinoceros was one of the most widespread type of Sumatran rhino, and the only one that lived on mainland Asia. It was also known as the Chittagong rhino, or sometimes the northern hairy rhino, because of its slightly thicker coat compared to other subspecies. It lived across a wide range of environments, from tropical rainforests and swamps to cloud forests, grasslands, and even mountainous regions. At its peak, its range stretched incredibly far across Southeast Asia, Eastern India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and even parts of China. But over time, that range slowly collapsed. This decline was largely driven by human activity, intensive hunting, along with rapid habitat destruction from agriculture, logging, and industrial expansion. This pushed the species closer and closer to extinction, and by the early 1900s, it had already disappeared from many of these regions. And by 1960, the last confirmed individuals weren't even in the wild anymore. 7 individuals were reported, scattered across zoos and circuses around the world. After that, everything becomes uncertain. There were occasional reports, one in India in 1967, others in Malaysia and Myanmar in the decades that followed, but none were ever confirmed. Some believe a small population may have survived in remote areas in Myanmar or parts of Malaysia, but political challenges and a lack of evidence have made it impossible to verify so far. And over the years it's been declared extinct more than once. And while it's still officially listed as critically endangered on the IUCN list, most experts now believe the northern Sumatran rhinoceros is already gone. The Caspian tiger was one of the largest big cats on Earth, rivaling even the Siberian tiger in size. It lived across a huge region, stretching from eastern Turkey and the Caucasus through Iran and Central Asia, all the way into western China. But despite that massive range, it wasn't found everywhere within it. Instead, it stayed close to rivers, wetlands, and dense vegetation, places where prey was reliable and cover was thick. For thousands of years, it managed to survive like this, but that began to change in the 19th century. As human activity expanded, the tiger's environment started to disappear. Riverbanks were cleared for agriculture, and especially cotton farming, so the habitats they depended on were destroyed. At the same time, both the tigers and their prey were heavily hunted, sometimes systematically by military forces tasked with clearing predators from the land, and over time their numbers collapsed. and by the mid-20th century, only small, scattered populations remained. After that, sightings became rare and uncertain. A few reports continued into the 1960s. By the 1970s, the Caspian tiger had mostly disappeared, with the most recent sighting of a Caspian tiger being in 1998. Today, it's officially considered extinct. But interestingly, the story might not end there. Recent research has shown that the Caspian tiger was very closely related to the Amur tiger, and because of that, there have been discussions about reintroducing tigers into parts of Central Asia, where the Caspian tiger once lived. In fact, efforts are already ongoing. In recent years, 2 tigers have been brought into a protected area in Kazakhstan, with another 3 to 4 individuals planned in the future. And the end goal here is to release tigers into the wild once again in regions of Kazakhstan. So, while it's not a true return of the Caspian tiger, it could be the closest thing to once again bringing it back. The Syrian wild ass, also called the Syrian onager, was a small subspecies of wild ass that once roamed across the Middle East. Its range stretched through modern-day Syria, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Turkey, where it lived as one of the region's most adaptable desert mammals. It was built for survival in extreme environments. The Syrian wild ass lived in deserts, semi-deserts, arid grasslands, and mountain steppes. It could endure intense heat and long periods without water. Its diet was flexible, consisting of grasses and herbs when available, but also leaves, shrubs, and thorny vegetation during dry seasons. This adaptability allowed it to survive in landscapes where few large mammals could persist. Even so, life in the Asiatic desert was dangerous. Its predators included Asiatic lions, Arabian leopards, striped hyenas, wolves, and other large cats such as the Caspian tiger. Foals were especially vulnerable and may have also been taken by cheetahs or jackals. Despite these pressures, however, the species had survived for thousands of years alongside both predators and humans. And humans knew this species well. Archaeological evidence shows that Syrian wild ass existed at least 11,000 years ago, with remains found at sites like Göbekli Tepe, Turkey, and in some regions humans even bred hybrids between wild asses and domestic donkeys, producing animals known as kungas, which were highly valued for pulling carts and ceremonial use. For centuries, travelers continued to report large herds across the deserts of the Middle East. But by the 18th and 19th century, heavy hunting and increasing human pressure caused a rapid decline, and by the early 20th century, the species was nearly gone. The last confirmed wild Syrian wild ass was shot in 1927. The same year, the final captive individual died in Vienna, and with that, the Syrian wild ass vanished forever. The Chinese paddlefish was the largest freshwater fish on Earth, native to China's Yangtze and Yellow River systems. It could reach over 3.6 meters or 12 feet, and possibly even up to 7 meters or 23 feet. It was one of the only 2 paddlefish species, alongside the still living American paddlefish. But unlike the American paddlefish, which feed on plankton, the Chinese paddlefish was a powerful predator that ate other fish and crustaceans. It lived mostly in rivers, but also spent parts of its life in coastal waters of the East China Sea. The species was already declining for centuries due to overfishing, but its collapse accelerated in the 20th century. A major turning point was the construction of the Gedroba Dam in 1981, which blocked its migration route to spawning grounds and fragmented the population. And combined with heavy fishing pressure and slow reproduction, this disruption made recovery impossible. By the 1980s, the species had become increasingly rare. It was officially protected in China in 1983, but the population continued to fall. And the last confirmed sightings were in 2002 and 2003, when 2 large individuals were caught in the Yangtze River. One was released and the other one died shortly after capture. Extensive surveys in the following decades failed to find any surviving individuals. In 2019, researchers concluded that the species was functionally extinct by the early 1990s and fully extinct by the mid-2000s, and the IUCN formally listed it as extinct in 2022. The Bali tiger was a population of tigers that lived exclusively on the Indonesian island of Bali. It was one of the smallest tiger subspecies, and today it's completely extinct. Tigers first arrived on the island thousands of years ago, likely during the last ice age when sea levels were lower. Over time, they adapted to Bali's environment, living in forests, mangroves, and open savanna-like areas. But their isolation also made them vulnerable. By the late 1800s, large parts of Bali were being transformed. Forests were cleared for agriculture, including rice fields and plantations, and at the same time, tiger hunting became increasingly common. And this wasn't occasional hunting. During the colonial period, organized hunting trips were carried out using traps and high-powered rifles. Tigers would often be lured in with bait, caught in a trap, and then shot at close range. In just a few years, many were wiped out this way. As their habitat shrank and hunting continued, their population quickly collapsed. And by the late 1930s, only a few individuals were believed to remain. Some may have survived into the 40s and possibly even 50s, but after that, there were no more confirmed records. Efforts were made to protect wildlife on the island, including the creation of a reserve in western Bali, but by then it was already too late. Today, all that remains of the Bali tiger are a few preserved skins, skulls, and bones in museums, and a handful of photographs, taken not long before it disappeared altogether. The paoli, also known as the Hawaiian black-faced honeycreeper, was a small bird that lived only on the island of Maui in Hawaii. It was unique in both appearance and evolution, being the only species in its genus. It actually remained unknown to science until 1973, when it was discovered on the northern slopes of Haleakala in high-elevation rainforest. At the time, researchers believed a small population still survived, making it one of the most important bird discoveries in Hawaii in decades. But even then, its situation was already critical. Fossil evidence suggests the paoli lived in lower, drier areas of Maui, but mosquito-borne diseases like avian malaria forced it into higher elevations, and this shift reduced its available food sources and forced it to heavily rely on mollusks and other invertebrates. Combined with habitat loss and invasive species, these pressures caused a rapid population collapse, and by the late 20th century, only a few individuals were known to remain. Conservation efforts began too late. One female was captured and moved to an area where there was a male present, but the female just ended up flying back. And in 2004, one of the last known poolies, a male, was captured and taken to a conservation facility in hopes of finding a mate. No breeding occurred and the bird died just 2 months after capture. After this, no confirmed sightings were ever made again. Despite extensive searches, the species has not been rediscovered, and the paoli was officially declared extinct in 2019 after years of no verified reports and repeated failed surveys. Plus, by then, habitat degradation, disease, and invasive species had already erased the conditions it needed to survive. The tarpan was a population of free-ranging wild horses that once lived across the Eurasian steppe. They roamed from Eastern Europe through parts of Russia and Central Asia, inhabiting open grasslands. For centuries, they were a regular part of the ecosystem. Tarpans were small horses adapted to cold winters and open plains. However, what counted as a true tarpan is still debated today. Some researchers argue they were genuine wild horses, while others believe they may have been feral domestic horses or possibly hybrids. What is certain, however, is that they gradually disappeared under human pressure. Wild horses were hunted for meat for thousands of years, and as human populations expanded, their grassland habitat shrank. Tarpans were also seen as competition for livestock, since they consumed grazing land and sometimes bred with domestic mares, producing offspring that were difficult to manage. And over time, this led to more aggressive removal efforts by humans. And by the 18th and 19th century, their range had collapsed to isolated pockets in the steppe. Some of the last surviving groups were reported in southern Russia and surrounding regions. However, sightings became increasingly rare and unreliable. The final confirmed wild individuals disappeared in the late 1800s, and the last captive tarpan died in 1909 in a Russian zoo, marking the official end of the subspecies. Afterwards, there were attempts to recreate tarpan-like horses through selective breeding programs. Breeds such as the Heck horse and Conic were developed to resemble the original animals, but they are domestic breeds and not true tarpans. So the true wild tarpan was gone forever. The northern white rhinoceros is a subspecies of the white rhinoceros, once found across parts of East and Central Africa. It is closely related to the southern white rhino, but its population has collapsed due to decades of poaching and habitat loss. Today, the subspecies is effectively on the brink of extinction. Only 2 individuals remain, Najin and her daughter Fatou. Both are female and live under armed protection at the Old Pejeta Conservancy in Kenya. And since no living males remain, the subspecies is considered functionally extinct. The image I'm showing is of Sudan, who was the last known male northern white rhino. Sudan was born in the wild and later brought into captivity, eventually becoming the most famous individual of his subspecies due to his role in conservation efforts. He lived alongside the last surviving females in Kenya. Despite attempts to encourage natural breeding, age and health issues made reproduction impossible, and Sudan died in 2018, marking the loss of the last male and effectively ending any remaining chances of natural recovery for the subspecies. Since then, conservation has shifted to assisted reproduction techniques. Scientists have successfully created embryos using genetic material from the deceased males and eggs from the remaining females. These embryos are frozen and stored for future implantation into surrogate southern white rhinos as part of ongoing efforts to possibly revive the subspecies in the future. So, while the northern white rhino is not fully extinct in a strict sense, its wild population is gone and it survives only through 2 individuals and laboratory embryos. Sudan's image has become a powerful symbol of extinction, showing how even heavily protected megafauna can reach the point where survival depends entirely on science rather than nature. The Pinta Island tortoise was a subspecies of Galapagos tortoise, native to Pinta Island in Ecuador. Like other giant tortoises of the islands, it was a slow-moving herbivore that shaped its environment by grazing vegetation and dispersing seeds, playing an important ecological role in the island's ecosystem. Its decline began in the 17th and 18th century, when whalers and pirates harvested tortoises in large numbers for food. Later introduced goats devastated the vegetation on Pinta Island, leaving the tortoises without enough habitat or resources to survive. And by the mid-20th century, the subspecies was believed to be extinct. Then, in 1971, a single survivor was found. His name was Lonesome George. George was taken to the Charles Darwin Research Station for protection. For decades, conservationists tried to save his lineage by pairing him with females from other Galapagos tortoise subspecies, hoping he might still produce offspring. But despite many attempts, no eggs ever hatched. It became increasingly clear that his unique lineage would likely end with him. As the years passed, George became more than just a tortoise. He became a living symbol of extinction. Scientists, visitors, and conservationists from around the world came to see him, knowing he was likely the very last of his kind. He lived in captivity for over 40 years, until the 24th of June 2012, when George was found dead by his long-term caretaker. His death marked the end of the Pinta Island tortoise subspecies, and with him, a unique branch of evolutionary history disappeared. Today, George is remembered not only as the last of his kind, but as one of the most powerful symbols of conservation ever known. A reminder that even when a species is found, saving it is not always possible. Although a few hybrid tortoises with partial Pinta ancestry have been discovered on other islands, so some hope remains. But it cannot fully replace what was lost. George remains the final irreplaceable individual of his entire lineage. Each of these animals once had a place in the world. They weren't myths or legends or stories from ancient history. They lived alongside humans, adapted, survived, and eventually disappeared. And what's left of them now are photographs, moments that carry more weight than they were ever meant to. When a species goes extinct, it doesn't just vanish in a single moment, it slowly disappears, until one day there's a last sighting, a last individual, a last photo. The question is now, how many of these moments are still ahead of us, and how many we still have time to change? I truly hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, I think you'll enjoy this video, where I discuss the possibility of an extinct animal still being alive. Leave a like on the video, and if you want to see more, subscribe to the channel. Have a good rest of your day, and see ya.